Okay.
And Claude is joining as well. So now you're at 7 members.
Okay, great. All right, so we'll get started, everybody. Thanks for turning that on, Cody. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the February 4th meeting of the CV6 Strategic Community Planning Committee. My name is Kavitha Matthew. I am the chair of the committee, and this meeting is called to order at 7:02 p.m. Tonight, we're joined by Assistant Director, District Manager Cody Osterman. Members of the public, you can raise any questions or comments that you have through the Q&A feature of Zoom. If there's time following the committee's discussion, we will field questions from the public. Letty Simon has volunteered to take minutes tonight. Thank you, Letty. You should have all received several emails from the board office with a link to the Doodle sign-up sheet for minute takers at your committee meetings in 2021. For your convenience, the link for this committee is also being posted in the chat right now. At the direction of the board chair, each committee meeting must have a designated minutes taker and a designated backup, just in case. To eliminate the guesswork, make sure that you volunteer for as many slots on the Doodle sign-up sheet as you can. If more than 2 people sign up for a particular month, the office will make sure to distribute the duties equitably and will let you know in advance which months you're due to take minutes. So if you've not already filled out the Doodle, please do so right away. The link to the Doodle poll is in the chat. So now would be a good time to fill it out. And with that, we can now take attendance by roll call, and Cody will conduct the roll call.
Kavitha, I think Claude has his hand raised. I don't know if you want to.
Oh, I'm sorry. Claude?
Yeah, I raised my hand because I joined a meeting late, attending a meeting that Sandro and Asia are also attending. And they may be coming on later. I just wanted to inform.
Oh, thank you, Claude.
Okay, so committee members, I will call your name. Please unmute yourself and say present if you are here. I will announce if there's quorum at the end. Kavitha Matthew.
Here.
Wells Magali. Wells has joined, I see that.
I'm here, present.
Gotcha. Asia Badi. We know she might be joining late. Jim Collins. Sandy McKee.
Here.
Rich Mintz.
Here.
Lou Sapersky. Sandro Sherrod. Also might be joining late. Letty Simon.
Here, present, whatever.
Corinne Vanderdonk.
Here.
Claude L. Winfield. That's 8 members present out of 11.
Okay, thank you, Cody. Also, the agenda for tonight's meeting was distributed ahead of time by the board office and appears on the screen before you. If there's no objection, we will adopt the agenda as stated. Members of the committee, if you object to adopting the agenda, you may raise your hand through Zoom. Okay. And seeing no objections, the agenda for tonight's meeting is adopted. The minutes from the January 7th meeting were distributed ahead of time by the board office. If there's no objection, we will adopt the minutes as drafted. Members of the committee, if you object to adopting the minutes, you may raise your hand through Zoom. Okay. And again, seeing no objections, the minutes from the January 7th meeting are adopted. They will soon be available on the CV6 website. Okay, and now going through the ground rules as usual. In order to conduct an efficient meeting, let's observe a few ground rules. No one may speak until granted the floor. Committee members, if you have a question about committee business or wish to make a motion, please raise your hand through Zoom. If you click the participants icon, the participants panel should appear and you should find the raise hand function there. If you still have technical difficulty, you may click the chat icon and relay your difficulty. The chat function should not be used for committee business or questions about agenda topics. All such remarks should be made on the record by raising your hand through Zoom. And chat should only be used to alert us to any technical difficulties we're having or to state in writing information like an email address that was already stated aloud on the record during the meeting. When a committee member is given the floor to speak, I will identify you and you can unmute yourself so that you can speak. And we're required by executive order to create a verbatim transcript of the meeting. So please keep your questions and comments succinct and germane to the discussion. And with that, we're going to move on to our committee business. On tonight's agenda, our first item is a presentation, and we are going to be joined tonight by Casey Berkovitz, a senior associate at the Century Foundation and a board member at Open House New York, who will discuss equitable and representative public engagement for housing. So welcome, Casey. You're there.
Yes, hi there.
There you are. Okay.
Hi.
Hi, how are
Good to
you?
see everybody. Thanks for taking the time this evening. So just to very briefly introduce myself, and before I get into the presentation proper, I do some work in housing policy and activism. I write about housing policy occasionally at the Century Foundation, which is a progressive nonpartisan think tank based in New York, as well as through the activist group Open New York, which Kavita mentioned. That said, I know you had a very comprehensive discussion of housing policy and zoning and finance last month, so I didn't want to repeat all of that. And so for the most part, I will stick to kind of the public engagement, input, etc. portion of this with a focus on housing and how it applies to proposed housing developments. But if it is ever helpful for me to get into kind of the zoning and finance side of things, please say so. I would be more than happy to discuss that as well, particularly if you have any questions that come up down the line. So with that, I'm gonna share my screen. Okay, can you all see my screen? Great. Cool. So, excuse me, sorry, resume share. Okay, slight technical difficulties there. So this is what we're going to be talking about this evening, is equitable and representative public engagement. And I want to focus on both of those words, both equitable and representative, right? Because as it turns out, the status quo of public engagement, as it has been done in most cities, actually, not just New York, is inequitable. It favors certain voices over others, and it's unrepresentative. It does not actually provide a representative impression of what the public believes should happen. Fortunately, the way to fix those two things is the same. So now to get into it. Again, the status quo. You all are community board members, so you are probably very familiar with how this stuff works. Pre-COVID, it was in-person meetings. They were usually on weeknights. They usually started at 6 or 6:30, sometimes 7. Could get up to 3 or 4 hours long. Very, very rarely were things like food and childcare provided. They oftentimes were not advertised, or not advertised well, or not advertised to people who didn't know where to look. This is partially due to resource constraints and partially due to status quo bias. And in some cases, but not all, they were held at inaccessible locations, meaning, for example, in New York City, city council and city Department of City Planning meetings are held in, downtown Manhattan. That's fine if, we're talking about a project in Midtown or Lower Manhattan where people can get there. But for a discussion of something in Flushing or in the Bronx, it means that people who live nearby are often unable to attend. All sorts of other issues we can get into, but already you can see this is it's a big ask to ask somebody to show up to one of these in person. So who does that exclude? It excludes people who work late. If a meeting starts at 6:30 and somebody has a retail job and they have to close at 9, they just can't come. It excludes people with care obligations. Most frequently, that means people with kids. But if you're caring for a sick relative, if you have, a roommate who needs help, if you have parents or other family members who need help either eating, getting to bed, need babysitting, anything like that, even if you're just helping out as a babysitter because your sister's work shift got rescheduled, means that you can't show up. Poorly advertised means that people who are not deeply engaged already probably aren't going to be able to attend. Now, you all, by virtue of the fact that you're on a community board or are attending a community board meeting, you're pretty deeply engaged, right? You know to go to cb6.org or .com, whatever your website is, and you know where to find the calendar, and you know what time meetings are and usually where they're held. Similarly, you can go to nyc.gov and you can find where the next Department of City Planning meeting is or Department of Transportation meeting. But most people don't have that information. Most people are not able necessarily to find out that there's a community board meeting at 7 o'clock on a Thursday evening. And then this last bit is people without access to transportation. In some places in the city and some places in the country, this is folks without a car, and some parts of New York City as well, or folks who are disabled and not able to ride the subway, and who there are all sorts of problems with getting around the city, either on buses or via other transportation options. If, as I'm sure you all are aware, bike theft is on the rise. If your bike gets stolen and you're not able to make it to a meeting, you're excluded from the democratic process in that way. So you can kind of see here that the picture I'm painting is not one of universal inclusion in what should be democratic processes. Public engagement is meant to be a chance for public officials or community board members or elected officials to get input from the public. In reality, what's been happening is they've been getting input from the public, but they've been getting input from a very small slice of the public. So now, fortunately, we actually have some data on who that small slice of the public is. This is a study based in Massachusetts by some professors at Boston University. Massachusetts actually has an interesting public disclosure law that when you offer input at a public meeting, you have to give your name. And so some researchers over the course of 3 or 4 years did some really incredible social science work and actually matched the names and towns of people who were offering public input to publicly available information, the voter file, stuff like that. What did they find? And I really recommend, they have a journal article that's publicly available and a full book as well called Neighborhood Defenders. What they found is that the people who offer input, and in particular they were looking at public meetings about housing, were older than average, more likely to be male than average. They were longtime residents, so they had lived in whatever town they were offering input in for longer than average. They were much more likely to be voters, and they were much more likely to be homeowners. And then you can kind of see this broken down by race as well, just as a visual here. Now, this matches a lot of other power structures in our society. When we talk about equity, these are many of the same things that we talk about, that, quite frankly, old white men are kind of in charge of most of our institutions in the United States. And so it's not entirely surprising that our local government meetings and opportunities for engagement mirror those power structures. That said, it's very problematic. As I said again at the beginning, it is neither equitable nor representative. It's not equitable because, as I'm sure we all know, moms are much more likely to take on child rearing responsibilities. People of color are much more likely to work late, work long hours, have jobs where they don't have set schedules necessarily until even the week or the day of, and so are harder to plan around. And folks who are, food insecure or otherwise aren't able to take time away from work to, without food or childcare provided, are less likely to show up. Then it's also unrepresentative, because if you are looking for a representative slice of society to see what their preference is for, transportation or schools or housing, more likely to be older, whiter, and maler is not a representative sample, and so it's going to skew the input that you get if that's the only thing you're looking at. So how do we do this right? Well, COVID is obviously an enormous tragedy, but one slight upside has been the shift to Zoom meetings. There are some hiccups, obviously, there are concerns around internet access. There are concerns around translation. There's obviously a huge unemployment crisis, and so all of the equity issues that come with unemployment and care obligations have been exacerbated. But putting meetings online means that concerns about childcare, concerns about taking time away from cooking a meal, for example, concerns about transportation, those have been lessened. And we've seen that play out in meetings across the country, in particular in New York City. We've seen double the attendance, at some meetings to equivalent meetings pre-COVID. I pulled out Soho, NoHo, and Gowanus as kind of high-profile examples of this, and also that were going in some form pre-COVID, and then that shifted online. And again, those meetings have seen roughly double attendance, and that's because someone who, for example, needs to stay home and watch kids, or needs to cook dinner, or even is still working late, is able to log on from home, whether that's calling in by phone or whether that's on Zoom like we are right now, and they're able to join, and they're able to get information, and they're able to offer input. That said, the social scientists who did that study in Massachusetts actually have, unfortunately, it's not out quite yet, but as you can see, they've shared kind of a preview of their findings. There's still a lot of disparities, and this comes down to this question of people who are already engaged. Moving online does not solve the problem that if you don't know that there's a community board meeting on a Thursday evening that you would show up to in person, you still don't know it's happening on Zoom. And so there are still issues with sharing information, and then there's some kind of self-selection in terms of who shows up. It's going to be more likely to be people who live close to a proposed change, and people who have some investment in one way or another. So how do you do it right? And we're gonna get into plenty of this in an interactive conversation in just a minute. Plan meetings where people can attend. So Zoom solves some of this, right? Almost everybody with internet access is able to log on. If you know a meeting is happening and you have a phone, usually you can dial in as well. Provide the services that people rely on. Anyone who's ever, I'm probably more recently out of school than many of you, although admittedly not as recently as I would like. I can tell you, any student club meeting, you want somebody to show up, you offer snacks. And that, that's true in life too. Not just because it's an incentive, but because people need to eat. If you're planning something in the evening, people are more likely to show up if they don't then have to eat dinner at 9 or 10 p.m. after a meeting. And then proactive outreach is really key. And this is where we get into addressing the disparities that Zoom has not closed, right? So this means by language. This isn't something that we've talked about before in this presentation, but if English is not someone's first language, they're probably gonna miss a notice about an upcoming meeting that's only in English. And so this is really variable by neighborhood and by city. In parts of the city, stuff needs to be advertised in Spanish. Parts of the city, it needs to be Mandarin or Cantonese. All the the huge tapestry of languages that are in New York City. It's going to vary by neighborhood, but that's really critical. Again, by location, and here I actually want to narrow down into not just neighborhood, but really get super specific. And this is for in person when we hopefully are able to do that again. Something like housing or transportation, it's really critical to quite literally meet people where they are. And so this image that I have up is from Minneapolis. Some of you may have heard their Minneapolis 2040 plan that got a lot of attention because they abolished single-family zoning as part of that, but it also included a ton of other infrastructure and transportation improvements. And it really is a model for proactive public engagement. And as part of that, they went to where people were. That means street fairs. That means tabling at bus stops. That means going to all sorts of community institutions. And in particular for transportation, this is critical. It's right on the edge of your community district, but on 14th Street, the busway, for example. If you just had a meeting in a community center on 34th Street, you probably wouldn't hear from a lot of people who are bus riders on 14th Street. But if you set up a table at bus stops on 14th Street, you would probably hear from a lot of people who ride the bus on 14th Street what they need in an improved busway or bus route. Similarly, online, I've discussed that, fortunately New York City is pretty good about making phone access available. But for folks who don't have high quality Wi-Fi at home, internet access is a real issue. And so ensuring that where the meeting is accessible to folks, whether that's by phone, by Zoom, other platforms, is important. Then lastly, through trusted messengers. And this can mean a lot of things depending on the neighborhood or the city context. I mentioned in Minneapolis, they went through community institutions. There's all sorts of, neighborhood associations, nonprofits, direct service groups, religious institutions that are really deeply tied into the neighborhood and that people trust. And so that people who might frankly be a little creeped out by, a government employee asking them something, asking them to fill out a survey, they're more likely to react positively if it's someone they trust from church, or if it's, a food kitchen that they've been to before, that they've volunteered with, who's asking them and saying, hey, this is a process that you should weigh in on. This is information that would be helpful if you shared. That's really, really critical. And of course, all of these overlap with each other. Some trusted nonprofit groups are going to be service providers to folks who are not primarily English language speakers. Religious institutions are going to also probably have locations that are useful and convenient and know where people already are, and so where you can reach people that way. And then lastly, and this is pretty housing specific, although not necessarily, is be honest about the kind of feedback that you want and what's possible. So to kind of then refer now back to the presentation last month, you want to be honest about what housing finance looks like. You hear this a lot in New York City politics, that people say, oh, 100% affordable. If it's on privately owned land, the reality is that it's usually going to take a lot of city subsidy or state subsidy to make it 100% affordable. If it's, and we'll get into this in a specific example in your district that I know you all have been talking about a lot, if something is changing no matter what, because an owner is selling, or because there's a by right development option that's just the plan B for whoever owns the property, make it clear that saying things should stay exactly the way they are is not actually on the menu. And you'll get, again, this is where we get to representative feedback as well. You'll get more useful feedback. So then this also gets into asking people to share an affirmative vision. You all probably, you're on a community board, you've heard plenty of landmarks applications and ULURP applications, that sort of thing. You know the system pretty well, but you should not expect that members of the public do. And so if you ask somebody, would you prefer option A or option B MIH levels in this ULURP application? Even once you explain what MIH is and what ULURP is, because they probably don't know, they're going to have a hard time choosing between 25% of units at, between 80 and 120% AMI and a deeper affordability option. But if you ask them, okay, what would you like to see in the neighborhood? And they say, oh, I would like rental apartments instead of condos. I would like park space instead of a community facility, or vice versa. I would like a bike lane and a bus lane, and I'm willing to give up 3 parking spots, or vice versa. Or you may hear, I drive here to pick up my kid from school every day, and I really need the parking because they have a child seat in the back of my car, and so I can't actually walk to pick them up. something like that. But if you require deep knowledge of policy details, if you require somebody to know exactly how many square feet a parking space takes up, or exactly what department agency in the Department of Transportation is in charge of city bike dock locations, you're not going to get useful information. And on the flip side, if you're honest about what's possible, you're going to maintain people's faith in the process that you've set up. You know, a lot of the obstacle to getting people to engage and share, you know, meaningful information with you is that they have to trust you. And part of this means going through trusted messengers, but it also means not lying to people. You know, if you promise, say, to think of an example, if you promise that a building is not going to get torn down, but also it's going to get all new kitchen facilities and it's going to be 100% affordable to people making 50% of the area median income without spending any new money, that's just, like, you know, logistically impossible. But if you promise people that, they'll hear it, they'll be like, oh, that sounds great. But then when it doesn't happen, the next time you ask them what they would like to see, they're going to remember that. They're going to remember that you made them promises that you then couldn't keep, and they're going to think that their input doesn't matter. And so it's really critical. And again, this looks different at different, you know, in different departments, in different steps along the way, different neighborhoods. But it's really critical to get the input that you need and be honest with people and trust your audience that they have beliefs that they believe in, they have the world they would like to see, but also that they can hear it if you say, actually, you know, that's not feasible and here's the reason why. Of course, you know, there's a balance there. You want to be aspirational, you want to set goals, you want to, particularly as kind of on the outside game, quote unquote, you want to push policymakers to put things on the table that they might say aren't feasible, but you do need to be honest about the trade-offs. So that's it for my presentation. I know that I probably talked too fast, and you have some questions, and then I do want to get into the Mount Sinai site and kind of put some of this stuff into practice. But before that, does anybody have any questions or anything you'd like me to revisit?
I mean,
Yeah.
I'm going to get to the questions, but thank you so much for that, Casey. That was very helpful. And I think, you know, we're kind of in that mode right now of trying to make sure that our engagement is productive and honest and useful. So hopefully we can get there. But I do see, Corinne, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Kavita. And thank you so much, Casey. That was great. You know, I mean, engagement has been on my mind for a long time. You know, even as like president of the PTA, yeah, you know, and now as a member of the community board, you know, it's so hard to get people to show up. I mean, it just. Like, even if you provide all these things, unless people feel like, people are just not gonna, like, it's just so hard. and then I almost, you know, so you know, like every time I see a movie or I hear people like complain about PTA moms, I'm kind of like, well, F you, you know, like I'm putting a lot of work into this, and you know, you do it. You know, so, but yeah, at the same time, I mean, the next 2 months, I've been begging the local NYCHA people to join, and I can't do it. And we've had meetings in NYCHA buildings just for that reason. And so if you just, I mean, do you have, beyond like, you know, providing childcare and translation services, I mean, is it kind of like I sometimes I just feel like it's beating a dead horse. I just, you know, Do you have any, I don't know, do you have anything to say to that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, just to start off, PTA is a great example. I was focused on housing because we'll get to MSBI, and I know that's what you all have been kind of focused on. But yeah, education is a great example and of kind of the other ways these same principles can get applied. In terms of, you mentioned NYCHA in particular, that's where I think like this trusted messenger thing is super, super important. That I'll just say for myself, because I don't know you, I don't know the folks you were talking to, but like, I'm a young, able-bodied white guy. If I go into a mostly Black community, wherever it is in the city, they're going to look at me a little funny, right? They're going to be like, who are you and what do you want? And so, talking to whether it's, if there's a residents association, talking to leadership there, if there's, whatever the kind of local community leaders are, like getting their engagement is super critical. But I also want to say, and this is true at the PTA level as well, in organizing and in marketing, there's this phrase, the ladder of engagement, that, there are kind of all different versions of it. Some people prefer the matrix of engagement, but the idea is that you're not going to get everybody to jump in the pool from your very first ask. If the only thing you're ever asking somebody to do is to show up to a meeting, if they're not, for some people, all you have to do is they just need to be asked and they'll show up. But for some people, it's, send them again, I know that particularly at the community board level, there are kind of public, whether it's resource or literally laws on how you can engage and what you can do. But just speaking broadly here, if it's sending somebody a survey in the mail, if it's hanging something on their door that says, we're considering doing XYZ down the block, check here if you'd like this, check here if you'd like this, check here if you'd like this. And then also, by the way, we have a meeting to discuss this further on, next Wednesday or whatever. Similarly, there's the big thing, getting back to the ladder matrix of engagement, is digital engagement. And I don't mean Zoom, I mean more like social media, newsletters, that sort of thing, can be really good early steps. Oftentimes the kind of stereotypical example of the first step on a ladder of engagement is like following someone on Twitter, right? And so thinking about how you represent yourself publicly, even when you're not directly talking to somebody, so that and I'll just say, is kind of from the activist side, which is a little less relevant to a community board or a PTA, is, if you have a super engaging social media presence and you're just putting stuff out that people enjoy seeing, then eventually down the line, when you put out an ask to show up to a meeting, people are going to be like, oh, I know that group, I know whatever it is, because they put funny tweets out. I like their memes, but maybe I'll try this thing out, right? And so kind of thinking through what those earlier steps are in engagement to build trust I think is super important. Just knowing that, like, again, even with Zoom, taking a couple hours on a weekday evening is a big ask, and thinking how you can build people up to that.
Right, thank you.
Thanks, Corinne. We have a few other questions. I'm just going to go down the line. Let's start with Rich.
Thank you. Mine is just short. One of the things you mentioned was the idea of having to push back against people who are unrealistic in their expectations about what might happen on a development site. People who would like nothing to happen, even though obviously something can happen as of right. People who would like a percentage of affordable housing that it's impossible to get rationally. How do you, I guess what I'm asking is, how do you push back while being respectful? Because I've had a lot of trouble with that, and there are people who have assumptions that can't be reconciled with economic reality, and I don't know what to do in those situations.
Sure. I mean, I do want to differentiate, particularly on the housing front, people who are making requests in good faith and people who are not. You know, I certainly do not mean to imply that everyone who says that they want 100% affordability on private land, for example, actually doesn't want anything to happen there. But there are some people who don't want anything to happen who realize that it sounds better to say that they want 100% affordability than to actually say that they don't want anything to happen there, right? And so it's important to differentiate the two of them.
Yeah, and I'm not even I'm not even just concerned with the people who are operating in bad faith. I'm concerned with the people who are in earnest.
Yeah, totally. You know, it is a really tough question, and so I don't have like, oh, here's your one easy trick to answer it. I think that, you know, the best answer, to the extent it's possible, is education. And that's tough to do in the heat of a ULURP hearing or something like that. But, you know, frankly, housing policy, housing finance, as you all learned over the course of an hour and a half last month, is really complicated, right? And so to the extent that you can lay out, just to kind of stay on this topic of affordability, like, okay, here's upkeep costs, here's financing, here's how, you know, what the trade-offs are. For example, you know, I think that particularly in the mayor's race, and looking now backward, although we're still in it, at Mayor de Blasio's administration and some of the choices he's made around MIH, like, there is a relatively simple, to the extent that anything is simple in housing finance, there's a relatively simple trade-off between fewer units with deeper affordability and more units with less affordability, right? That you can create 3 units at 40% AMI, or you can create 8 units at 80 to 120% AMI. And, you know, that's the sort of thing that, you know, I see some of you are nodding, so hopefully you understand, but is not always immediately obvious. And so to the extent that you can kind of get into the numbers a little bit. The other thing, and I didn't mention this actually in the kind of the last slide about an affirmative vision for what people want. But this is where you get into kind of like interactive presentations. There's a planning term called a charrette that's like a very interactive public engagement session that often has interactive maps. You've probably seen, you know, big white paper where people write what, you know, everyone's suggesting on markers or putting Post-its up or stuff like that. You know, this is again bring back to education. You know, people have different learning styles, and oftentimes just saying you're wrong, or no, actually this is how it's not going to get through. So saying, okay, you have the equivalent of 8 jelly beans of affordability. Do you want to put those 8 jelly beans in, you know, in 2 units and make them cheaper, or do you want to spread them further? You know, getting through kind of like an interactive session. Similarly on stuff that has to do with horizontal space, whether that's zoning, school districts, transportation, looking at a map and saying, okay, we can draw this bus line here, or we can draw this bus line here. Which would you prefer? But this bus has to get to point C at some point. You know, thinking through other ways to kind of demonstrate in real life what the trade-offs are, I think is helpful there. But yeah, there sadly there is not a really good answer.
All right, we're going to go to Claude and then Letty.
Did you say me?
Yep, you're up, Claude.
One comment, charrettes have not always proven to be very interactive. Maybe for the participants, but maybe between the presenter and the participants, but not between the participants. We've done a number of charrettes. Casey, I think you gave a very nice presentation, very on point. So I'll ask a simple question. In terms of engagement, past pandemic, do you think a viable structure would be a combination of in-person and online in meetings like the community board, where we had more online involvement in a particular meeting?
I really hope so. You know, some of that is going to come down to legal choices that the city makes, right? You know, the online meetings were enabled by the governor's order that's going to expire at some point, at which point the city will have to reauthorize some form of, you know, online participation or attendance. So, but moving beyond kind of the legal requirements there, yeah, I think it would be a tremendous idea, and I think that there's been obviously some people haven't had as much success with online hearings, but I do think enough people have been able to attend meetings that they otherwise would not have been able to, that something will come out of it. You know, there's kind of this question of, again, getting back to equity, how do you ensure that people who are attending online get an equivalent, if not equal, experience to people who are in person? You know, I'm sure as you all know, public feedback that is emailed to you can be excellent, but it's probably not going to affect you as much as somebody yelling into a mic in person. And so there's the same issue there with online input versus in person, even if it's over Zoom or over video. And I think there's a lot of room for creativity there. I've heard folks suggest things like alternating Zoom and in-person public testimony, for example. I've heard folks actually suggest, because of that kind of in-person online imbalance, actually keeping the kind of the structure of a meeting online, but having a space in person where people can show up if they want, which would mean, you know, projecting, for example, if you all as community board members wanted to be at home, it would mean projecting the Zoom onto a big auditorium screen and allowing people to show up and talk into a camera and a microphone there, as opposed to trying to insert the virtual process into kind of more of a traditional in-person meeting. Although, frankly, that seems like a big ask for policymakers.
Interestingly, Gail Brewer has done some of that in her meetings.
Yeah, I think she's been very open to ways to modernize the community board process, which I admire. The other thing is, you know, taking advantage. It's a big ask for you as community board members, but for things like, you know, ULURPs or other kind of non-community board, but citywide or even statewide agency meetings, just having multiple meetings, having an in-person meeting and having an online meeting, and saying we'll collect all the information and then put it in one place. That's obviously a big ask for staff, which is part of why I don't think it would happen at the community board level, because then you all would have double the obligations. I wouldn't wish that on you. But that's another alternative as well, so that at one meeting, everyone's kind of on equal footing in person, and then at another one, everyone's on equal footing online. But again, there's a lot of room for creativity there, and I do hope that folks come up with some solutions, because I think that some sort of hybrid model is what we'll see post-pandemic.
Casey, we have a few more. So we're going to go Letty and then Kyle and then Wells. Okay, so Letty, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I think the presentation was very interesting and I appreciate it. And I had a question about or a solution about how you get people to go to meetings. And a lot of that is in the message that you're communicating with them. Somehow you've got to say it, whether it's subconsciously or whatever, it's got to appeal to the person reading the message, how it affects them, and also to put into their minds some positive suggestions or solutions, just to get them thinking and want them to come. Instead of just being negative and against something, you can be for something else. That's all I wanted to say. And I found that's worked for me on controversial issues in the past, and drumming up interest and support, so that people feel people are basically selfish. They make the time if it's to their interest. And all of these things are to their interest. It's just how to get through to them. That's it.
Yep, absolutely. Totally.
That's as simple as, it's as complicated and as easy as that.
Thanks for that, Letty. So I don't think it was a question, right? It was a,
No, just
comment
I
about-
also wanted to say thank
Yes.
you. I'm enjoying the presentation.
yes, thank you. Kyle?
Thank you, Kavitha. Hey, Casey, thank you so much again for the presentation. I'm actually the chair of the community board, and I found this really, really fascinating because this is actually something that we've been talking about internally for quite some time. And, Corinne mentioned, and many of the other members mentioned as well, about our intention in making sure that we are recruiting to all corners of the district, all nooks and crannies, to make sure that we are represented. So just as an extension of those questions about engagement, and actually this is something that I will be tasking the Budget and Governmental Affairs Committee on, and actually was going to report on at our full board meeting next week about reaching out to even members of the public in a survey format, as you mentioned, to hear about how this process has been working, being virtual, things that they'd like to see going forward, and exactly what you were talking about what are the needs, what are the obstacles to being engaged in community board. So the first question I have for you is, in your research, have you found out anything about how community boards are viewed by people who are not self-selecting, as you mentioned, who are civically engaged and know what community boards are, but kind of as, our role in the community? That's an important thing for me as chair, is really defining what we are in the community. A lot of people don't know what community board is, and if they guess it's something like, hey, is it like Parks and Recreation, the show? And we're like, yeah, okay, as long as the whatever, makes the connection for you. But have you seen in your research anything that kind of provides insight to that? And then is there anything that Open NY is doing in terms of campaigns or outreach on your own to make sure that people are learning what that role is and how they can get engaged?
Sure. Unfortunately, no, I have not seen any survey, representative survey data on that. Although I bet someone running for borough president could put a question in one of their polls and find out. And I would love to see that data. My hunch is similar to you, that the vast majority of people just don't really know what community boards are, and if they do, it's Parks and Rec. And so, politicians are very good at putting their names on things and taking credit. So to the extent that you as CV6 can do that as well, sometimes this does happen with, I feel like I've seen on bus stops or trash cans, like brought to you by borough president, council member, mayor, etc. So to the extent that, you're able to secure extra park space, tell people about it, that sort of thing. And then through Open New York, we actually just sent an email earlier this week telling our members and folks who are on our mailing list that applications are open to join community boards, and kind of to share what community boards do. In an activist role, we spend a lot of time at community board hearings talking about pending ULURP applications usually. And so for us, it's like, okay, you've been to these hearings, you've said your very specific thing, but here's the other things that they do and why you might want to get engaged. And I'd also point to like Transalt, Transportation Alternatives, has done a really great job for a number of years now on activist education, on recruiting people to community boards and doing that sort of thing. And so, on your side as well, like if you get, I'm sure there are people who are not on the community board who are at most meetings who you recognize, or organization names that when there's something they care about, they show up. I'd encourage you to kind of reach out and say, appreciate your civic engagement, but come to the flip side, come join a community board, tell people about it, that sort of thing. Because there is this community of people who are engaged, who are activists, whether they're work on campaigns, whether they have issue specific things, whether they're just neighborhood characters who've lived in Community District 6 for a long time, who've shown up to all the meetings for 30 years. the folks who do know what a community board is, who are not necessarily members yet for whatever reason, I think those are kind of the low-hanging fruit, so to speak. And then similarly, like as I mentioned on the, the Parks and Rec example, is they build a park, right? When you get something like that, when you get a win like that, tell people about it. The thing I like to say about effective public engagement is that politicians know what it looks like because they run campaigns every 2, 4, 6 years. And on a campaign, if you are not translating stuff into the relevant languages, if you are not providing food at your events, you're going to lose, right? So anybody who's won a campaign for elected office knows what this stuff looks like. And so they should be implementing those same things when they're in government to get better public input. And then on the flip side, you all are not elected, of course, but you're engaged. You follow local campaigns. I'm sure that if your state senator, your city council person is responsible for securing a couple extra affordable homes for somebody, that those people know that they're responsible for it. If you are able to keep a Pops open an extra 3 hours, make sure people know that you did that, right? That sort of thing.
Okay, I think we have one more question from Wells before we get into the next part.
Hi, thank you, Casey. Great presentation, so on point. And building on Kyle's comments, this is not a question really, it's really a question to the whole committee here. This issue touches on, I think, all of our committees, right? And I was just wondering if, in order to bring awareness to this issue, or kind of the most effective tactics in doing this kind of engagement, especially going forward post-COVID, as we were talking about in the fall, could this committee consider writing a resolution of some kind in support of the kind of continuing online engagement? Is that something is that the right kind of move for us to do, to bring awareness to this issue, or to maybe kind of proactively raise it publicly, that it's something that we're in support of, that we think in order to create a more inclusive process, or to ensure a more inclusive process going forward, that we support some type of committed and more inclusive meeting strategy that includes an online or a phone option, or we have to write the reso, but like something like that. I don't know if that's appropriate or what people think about it.
I would second that.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And yeah, it'll get us into actually writing resolutions, which we rarely do, or ever in this committee. So that's great.
I volunteer to draft it if someone
Okay.
can maybe be my co-writer and help me out. Maybe I have a
Yeah, or someone with a lot more experience writing resos could look at it as well. But that's a great
that'd
idea.
be
Do you
great.
mean, just to clarify, Wells, do you mean for the entire community board overall?
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I mean, and I think as a kind of strategic planning group, that's our purview, right? It's
Sure.
something that's, I mean, Kyle, I'd love to hear Kyle's thoughts on this, but I think, to present this as something for the full board.
Yeah, could you just reiterate again what exactly the resolution would be?
I think it would say, Kyle, something like, whereas we are aware that having an online platform during COVID has created a more inclusive and engaged process, that going forward post-COVID, that we would support a continuation of availability of other ways of engaging with the board meetings, including online, phone. I'd have to kind of figure out exactly how this is worded, but it's essentially that's the
Yeah, so the issue with that is that that's more under the budget and governmental purview, to be honest. So this committee, obviously strategic planning committee, is 197A in nature. So we're talking about how we're developing the sites and being strategic about that. So I do want to talk with budget and governmental affairs about that, because I actually was going to task them with doing, more conversations about this and getting a survey out of that before putting a resolution together, so that we would have a way to really beef it up with that. So I would ask, I mean, this is up to the committee, but I would say, if we could hold off on that, because first, I don't think it is within the purview. And then also, I think there needs to be more discussion on it before moving forward, because we haven't even heard from people from the public about what they would think about this option going forward. So that's just my thoughts on that.
So I think we should discuss it as a group, but maybe we could co-author it with them or kind of
Sure.
co-sponsor it.
Yeah, that's absolutely, yeah. And Kavitha, we can talk about it at our exec committee meeting in a couple of weeks and discuss how we can partner up on that, because this is obviously, as Casey mentioned, going to be a huge issue going forward. It's already been an issue. How do we get people to engage with the community board and attend? In some ways, we've dropped off because we've gone to a virtual platform, but in many ways, that's allowed people who could not attend community board meetings before to attend as well. And so thinking about what's lost and what's gained is a nuanced conversation and a big conversation. So yeah, I'm totally cool if you want to, co-sponsor and do a joint resolution or anything like that. But I would hold off on it for tonight.
Okay, all right, I think that sounds fine.
I just want to just mention one thing, because I don't know exactly what meeting, so many meetings this was mentioned, but I know that the borough president's office is talking about this a lot, and how to take some of this, what's happening now, and have it work moving forward. So if there is talk about a resolution and surveys, I think we should contact the borough president's office and see what's already being done there.
Absolutely. And that's, I'm going to be bringing this up at borough board as well in a couple of weeks to make sure that we're talking with the borough president's office, but also the other community boards. Because obviously other community boards within Manhattan, at least, also have different experiences and challenges and needs particular to that. And one of the things that I'm very keen on doing is joint resolutions with other community boards to amplify issues and to make sure that they're being listened to. So that's something I want to discuss with them as well and pull into the conversation. So yes, absolutely.
So on that, Kyle, I just wonder to jump in on that topic. Well, first of all, I think Brian Lafferty's here at the meeting. I don't know if you have anything to say on that, but also just, do we have data on attendance at these meetings as opposed to attendance at our in-person meetings, and trying to compare,
So yeah, so at the executive committee meetings, Jesus goes through the data that we have for online. So this is another point about why virtual is very helpful. Before, we weren't tallying how many people were attending meetings in general. Obviously, we do attendance for board members, but we don't do a general attendance. But with virtual platforms, we get to see how many people are attending, how many panelists there are. And then obviously through the recordings on YouTube as well, we have those metrics. So some of that was shared, and it's been exponential in growth since we've moved to a virtual platform. So that is definitely something that will be taken into consideration as well. But yeah, I was talking to Jesus about this earlier today about, how we want to move forward. That's a conversation that him and I value very much about, we don't want this. Obviously, part of this is with the state as well about public meetings laws and things like that. And we don't want to be scurrying to figure out how we're going to, conduct our meetings 2 weeks after, a law is changed. We want to be proactive in that, and we want to be part of that conversation. So yeah, so that's all going to go into it. Surveys, working with borough president's office, data, and we will, put that into something that is actionable and comprehensive.
Okay, thank you, Kyle. That sounds great. I am scheduled to talk with Rick and Reshma next week, so hopefully we can
Perfect.
discuss that as well. So I think, Casey, let me know. I know you wanted to offer up some advice perhaps on a particular site that we're working on, which is the MSBI, not that we're working on, but that we're trying to engage the community in a discussion around what we assume is coming down the pike, which is the sale of the Mount Sinai Beth Israel sites. And just to kind of set it up, I think you already know this, Casey, and obviously all of the board members know this, and I'm not sure if the members of the public know this, but we've set up a website that's kind of a subdomain of our CB6 site. It's perlmanplace.org, where we are trying to share as much information as we know about that and collect some data. So that's one way that we've been trying to just get the word out on that, and I'll go over that a little more later. But given that, I'm not sure if folks from the committee may have questions around how we can engage the community more for that particular, topic or issue, or if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily want to drive this conversation completely, because you all have spent a lot more time engaging with the site already and the owners already than I have. But I do think, as to the question that Rich asked, it's helpful in a lot of ways to kind of see what this looks like in practice. And so the fact that you all are deep in these conversations already, I think is a good opportunity to put it in practice. So, talking about meeting people where they are, so to speak, if to the extent that you have the time and the resources to engage with a pop-up outside the site and say, literally ask people who are walking by, this site might be changing, what would you like to see? And again, that's where you need to be honest and realistic about what the options on the table are for that site in particular. Similarly, on the transportation side, I'll admit I don't actually know like what the closest bus lines are to the site, but thinking about and even potentially getting in touch with like DOT or the MTA about like, okay, do we have any information about who's traveling near this site, who is commuting near this site? One of the things I think about a lot, and this is kind of much broader than any particular site, is that in particular with the overnight subway shutdown, is that there are a lot of people who have really, quote unquote, essential jobs, right? Who are doing really important and undervalued work, who also have the longest commutes, in part because job centers are in some places and a lot of people live further out. And so to the extent, especially with other hospitals that are in or near your district, like I would bet that there are a lot of medical workers who, given the opportunity, would love to live a lot closer to Community District 6. And so to the extent that, you can talk to the city, to the extent that you can talk to the current or the new owners, to elected officials in the area about in particular getting that sort of input and kind of seeing, okay, what would that look like to do that? That's the sort of thing as well as, and then, on the education side, on the, whether it's PTA or something else, like thinking about what the zoned schools are there, what the admissions policies are. And again, I don't know the specifics of this, but, getting in touch with either the Department of Education or the local school leaders and looking at, okay, is there, is actually the local zone school over capacity, and is there time between today and whenever someone is living at that site to rezone it to balance that capacity? Is there actually extra capacity at whatever the local zone school is? And so in that case, can you ask the new owners to prioritize family-sized units as opposed to studios or one bedrooms, that sort of thing as well? And again, this all hopefully is stuff that you're hearing from community members too, right? It's, if to go back to kind of the top of the list example of tabling outside a site and asking people who are walking by, if the first question is, this is going to be homes, would you live here? If the answer to that is yes, then there are follow-up questions, right? Then it's, okay, how big is your family? What would you like to see in a home? What's important to you in the neighborhood? And, because the addition of a bunch of new homes to a particular block also means new people who are going to the coffee shop or who are commuting elsewhere in the city, not just commuting to CB6, but commuting from to elsewhere in the city. And so getting that sort of input. And then, yeah, I mean, the Parliament Place website is absolutely beautiful. It's very impressive. After our prep call, I checked it out. It's fantastic. And so, to the extent that you can do kind of traditional online engagement, marketing, advertising, et cetera, to get it in front of the relevant eyes, the more the merrier. So that's whatever that means in terms of the resources that are available to you. Certainly, I'd imagine you could put it on the main CB6 website, and link to it from there. You all have, social media channels that you run. I'm sure you have social policies about what you can and can't post, and your schedule and all of that. But to the extent that you can plug it there, and then, actually running ads is probably more than could be asked, given, the capacity of a community board. But to the extent that you can talk to, I don't know if who like the new owner of the site is going to be, or if that's, if that's still TBD. But like, when you do, talking to them and saying, we have all this information from this website that we set up, and share it with them and say, here, we have. Again, representative community input is important, not just to be equitable, but because it's useful, right? And so, to the extent that you have a collaborative relationship with whoever that ends up being, having data that you can share right off the bat is going to be helpful.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think it will be very helpful, and I'll go over some stats after this about what we've seen in terms of activity with the website. And I mean, you made me think a little bit about making sure that we're being very candid about, what influence we even have over this. It really is just data gathering and trying to get community engagement in terms of interest in what's going to happen there. Not that we have any control over what's actually going to happen there in any significant way. So yeah, I could totally see using maybe the park next to it or something to set up the site. Of course, with COVID, I'm not sure exactly how that works. Does anyone else have questions? Oh, I think I see somebody. Hang on.
Super quickly, just to respond to that very briefly. I don't want to underrate how valuable and influential good data can be, right? Especially if you can make it clear that that it was a representative and equitable process, right? That you didn't cherry pick to get the in whatever your preferences are for the site. That can be really meaningful, both to whoever the new owner ends up being, but also to the council member who is, or the mayor or the borough president, who are going to have some amount of sway as well. But again, being honest, like Kavitha and Rich, when we prepped for this, we had a slight conversation. I would be shocked if MIH, as it stands today, is in place when this site gets the financing, right? I think it's going to change in some form. Same with state programs, whether that's 421A, J51, et cetera. There's, the kind of broader structures in which it's happening are probably going to change. That's not something you necessarily have control over. And so, again, this is why I'd say that, kind of this affirmative visioning process is important, because if you ask somebody, would you prefer MIH option A or MIH option B? Not only are they not going to know what you're talking about, their answer might not be relevant when that decision is eventually made, right? But if they say, yes, I have a family and there's a great school down the block, and so I'd prefer more 3 and 4 bedrooms than 1 bedrooms and studios, that's going to be useful, kind of no matter what the legal framework is. So,
yeah, I think that's very good information. I see a question from Corinne.
Yeah, more just of a comment. Like you also, I just wanted to kind of underscore it. How when the Renwick opened, even though I started the meeting with stating that we as a community board have no, that it was a done deal and that we have no power to stop it or in any way. I think even it somehow still wasn't believed. It was just kind of bizarre how. So I just kind of want to underscore that we somehow have to on the website just kind of say that. Whether people want to hear it is a whole other thing, but yeah. Just anyway, so just wanted to say that.
Yeah, I agree, Corinne. That's my concern is we're going through all this effort and then people are going to say, well, we said we wanted this and we got that, and we'll just throw our arms up in the air at that point. If anyone else has questions regarding MSBI in particular for Casey, otherwise we will move on to the next agenda items shortly. So I don't think we have any folks from the public either. So yeah, so moving on. Thank you so much, Casey. You're welcome to stay and hear some of our, related business that we're going to discuss tonight, but I'm going to jump on to the next agenda item. We really appreciate your help tonight. That was very much, on top of mind for all of us. So, and since you've been through this process recently, the Soho NoHo stuff, that's really why we wanted to get some kind of ideas of how are things going and what's the most useful way of engaging the community.
Well, thank you all. I don't know, I'd be happy to, anyone who has questions or wants the presentation, happy to share that. So I don't know if you want to share that after, or if I should drop it in the chat or anything like that. But
yeah, if you could send it to Cody, who's the one who sent you the link, that would be great. And we could, I don't know, Cody, if we're going to have it linked to the site somehow or anything for others. We are trying to, yeah.
We post all of the presentations
Yeah.
publicly in the same database that has our minutes and agendas archived. There's a field for presentations as well, so that people can review, download at their leisure.
Yeah.
All right, I'll be in touch with that then. And yeah, so for all of you, please as well, just feel free to email anytime. And I do want to say also, thank you all. The fact that you're talking about this at all means that you are light years ahead of some of your peers in the city. So I appreciate that you all care about this and that it's something you're talking about and that you invited me to talk to you about. So thanks very much.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think, Casey, we realized as we got going on this, how little or at least I did, how little I knew on a lot of the topics, which is why we've kind of been having the last several meetings as info sessions that we hope are, and since we're recording everything on YouTube, folks from the public too can feel free to go back a few meetings and watch things and really get, build up, impress your friends with your knowledge base on affordable housing options. It's amazing what's out there. So with that, we'll move on to agenda item 2, which is reviewing next steps and timing for outreach. It's the same thing, to develop a community plan for MSBI site. I did want to state some of the things we have been doing this past month, which we have some more kind of formalized emails going out to key stakeholders in the community, the organizations, the electeds. We had a list, and Kyle and Cody in the office are working on sending those letters out, just to make sure, even though we've been announcing it in our newsletter, that we kind of personally engage people and share it with the community, particularly the community organizations that are directly around that site. So that should be going out soon, I believe. And Cody, you can speak to that if you have any information on it. We also had the initial announcement about the website in December, which got 90 visitors, I believe. And then we had another announcement go out in February in our latest newsletter, which had 48. I'm not sure if they're all unique or not. We can't quite gauge all that information from the responses, but we do have, from the survey that we have attached to the website, 94 survey responses. And I really do want to build that up, because I think that gives us the most interesting data out there, where we had a list of topics, a list of things that people want to see in the community. And really, it looked like from a cursory glance at it, I haven't done a deep dive, but it looked like affordable, supportive, and senior housing was top of mind for most of the people who. But I mean, that means a lot to me, because I'm like, okay, it's not just us in the community board that feel like this. It's people out there are feeling like we need this. So I think that's important to note. And we'll continue to try to get the word out and build up. And if you know people that you want to send out something, Cody, if you guys prepare that email and have any kind of social media stuff for images or anything, maybe you could share, or we could work on it together.
Yeah, that's what we're working on. We're actually working with some outside help that we've enlisted, because as grateful as we are to rely on board members for graphic design and skills that we don't have, or to improve the skills in the office. And you know, two of our more recent events have had some great posters created by board members. We're ramping up like the need for these things, and we're working with some outside help who should have some images for us early next week, and so we want to put those in that email when we send them out, so that there's like this kind of social media toolkit, if you will, so that an elected or a neighborhood association can easily take some of that same imagery, use it, retweet us, etc. Just what you said.
That's great. That's really helpful. I see Wells, you have a question?
Yeah, this is to Cody and Kavitha, maybe you know as well. In terms of, this is fantastic that we have like almost 100 respondents to the survey on our site. I'm wondering, you know, just thinking about Casey's earlier comments about this kind of self-selective group, you know, like how can we get this survey out like beyond this kind of like already engaged population that knows about CB6, or that, you know, that has found this website, or that is on our newsletter list? Like, how is there, you know, should we talk about a strategy about, you know, trying to get it out there in the world broadly? I think that's probably this agenda item, Kavitha, and maybe we have some thoughts on how to do that.
We've recently done something where we emailed residents of a particular building, a very large building, for a project. We sent a mass mailer to everyone in the building, and it was, I don't remember, a 300 unit building or something. And we certainly have some money in our postal budget for doing a one-off building or something like that, targeting specific buildings, maybe a bit more if they're not 300 unit buildings all around. But our response rate was super low when we sent out this mailer to everyone. And the ask on that mailer was like, we think you might be getting overcharged in your rent. Can you please email us? And I got a dozen people to email me of a 300 unit building. And that was with, like, in big bold, like, you might get more money back from, you know, so I'm somewhat skeptical now of mass mailers, but certainly worth trying again, and in a non-COVID era, right? Just door knocking or flyering under people's doorsteps so you have to pay for postage is also an option.
Yeah, I feel like we could do more of a digital outreach of, I don't know if there's something we could do where it's like one flyer that gets posted in a building, and there's something there's like a thing you can scan on your phone, or a link or something that, you know, people can go to based on that. I know in my building, people tend to read those posts that they put in the elevator, because we always think, oh my God, they're going to shut down the water or something, you know, those are always annoying. So people actually read those. So we can look into that. But I appreciate that. That's great. And once you get that, kind of like look at that outreach email with the images and things, and we ask, I think, Wells, you know, we've been trying to identify these community groups, and if you have anything in mind, I think that would be really helpful if we had other groups. We talked about religious institutions and schools and, you know, neighborhood organizations and tenant organizations and all of that. But if there's more that are out there that we think we should engage, we should definitely talk about that. I see Sandy.
Actually, Corinne had her hand up first, but I'll be fast. What about something like The Gothamist? I mean, that's something I read every day. And also all of our electeds have newsletters and things that they send out. So that's another really good, you know, they already have social media that extends pretty far and wide, if we could ask them.
Yeah, I think that's what Cody's preparing, or the office is preparing this so that the electeds could do that. Is that right? But yeah, that's a good idea to go beyond that to some publications.
Press. I'm not sure what exists anymore.
Yeah, we've been talking about it and didn't feel ready, but now I think we're kind of ready to get out there, because we definitely want some input, some community input on the survey, at least. Corinne, go ahead.
So I have a few ideas, and most of them cost money. So, one of the things is I'd actually, I tried to Google our website to see what would happen, and it wasn't showing up at all. A long time, I was I was one of the first adopters of Google AdWords, and at the time, it was very cheap as long as it wasn't something kind of generic that other companies were really bidding on. So we could, maybe just cost a few dollars a month to make sure that it kind of pops up on the top as an ad. If I get kind of, I can look into that and then see, if you guys are up to that, what it would cost. I know Jim had tried to Twitter handle, and then that kind of went nowhere. Last I heard, should we try again, or has Jim tried again?
I don't know. I was going to try to get an update on that today. That was next. That was 2 down on my agenda. I hadn't gotten there yet.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
No, that's fine. I think your idea is a good one. And I actually, on that note, Corinne, I was also thinking on the CB6 website, I feel like it goes one way, but not the other. Because if you go to Perlman, it takes you back to the main CB6 website. But I don't know if we have a link going the other way, like on our, do we? You can let me know. And if, can we do that? Because that would obviously make sense for people just visiting to see in the news kind of section of important things that they can click that and go straight to Perlman.
We can add it to the announcement section of the.
Yeah, I think that would be good, because I was looking at that today and I thought, oh my God, we're not on there, and we need to be added. I really appreciate the newsletter stuff, but I think being on the website, people tend to just like look things up there, so that would be helpful. We also talked about Link NYC. Is there anything with that, or are we not? It doesn't fit the kind of model of what I know we have like community board meeting announcements on Link.
We could probably get on there. The question is, what could we say that would be coherent and compelling enough that people can digest in 10 seconds?
I would just want them to go on the site and fill out that survey for as the nugget of information, and then beyond that.
So that the ask is, want to help shape the future of. Without
making everybody feel like they have overwhelming control, as we've been saying, just put your input, your community input or something.
Yeah, and I just wanted to, sorry, does anybody know anybody on the PTA or at least a parent at ICE, the school that's in the old Stuyvesant building?
No.
I
can ask around.
If you can ask around, I'll ask around too. I think I might actually know an old parent from PS40, because it's right there. So maybe, even the middle school kids themselves can turn it into a project. That could be fun. I have tried talking to Susan from Sci-Town, and she's just ignoring me, which is unusual. So maybe somebody else can try. I must have said or done something.
On the outreach list, I think that we just are sending out that bigger email to, and I'm happy to do. I don't know her I mean, I don't know personally, but I think we should be able to get some response, I would think, from Suzanne.
And then I just wanted to mention one thing. I attended the economic impact housing something or other with the what is it, the Rebney, thank you. And just when it comes to MSBI, he said something that was really interesting, and he said the one thing that developers value over everything else, not even profit, like the amount, but not the percentage of profit, but just, like if it's, what they want is predictability. So if we can package it where it's predictable, And not like, oh, we're going to make $1 bazillion, but more like, oh, we're going to make, X amount of percentage each year. And it's, and there's no ULURP and there's no blah, 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 then there's going to be, it's just going to help a lot. Anyway, so I just wanted to.
Corinne, could you tell me what you're reaching out to Susan for?
For Susan to send out the link, some kind of blurb in there in the tenant association meetings or tenant association
About
newsletters.
Perlman Place?
Yeah.
Let's wait
I'll
for
speak to her tomorrow.
You know what?
Thank you, Claude.
Claude, let's wait till when Cody gets that email all nice and pretty with the images and stuff. I think that's the one. And then maybe you can jump in and just, Cody, maybe Claude can help with outreach or something, just so we get some response on that.
Well, I'll speak to her about speaking to you guys.
Okay. Or just give her a heads up that this is coming, because it will go out to her and we want it to be shared. Okay, thank you. So yeah, beyond that, the next topic was social media, and I don't know, we did bring it up last time, and I stated again that I am no social media whiz, so I'm looking for someone on the committee who wants to kind of take that on. Maybe once we have those images and things, it'll be a little easier. But
I mean, I'm not an expert or a whiz of any kind. In fact, Rich kind of is, but he does so much already that that I am. If Jim is kind of stuck on getting a handle, I can definitely give it a shot. Right, Rich? Rich, can I ask you questions if I'm stuck? Thank you.
Sure, if I can help, I will. I may not be as much of an expert as you think in the specific things you're talking about, but I'm happy to help if I can.
Okay, thanks.
You guys will be much better than me. I'm not even on Twitter or anything, so it's, we'll be better. But we'll circle back with Jim, and between the three of you guys, I feel like we'll get somewhere with that. And that's really what I had in terms of updates on outreach right now. Again, once we get that email kind of put together that's going out to the electeds and everyone, maybe we can send it to committee members. And if you guys have personal connections with people, you can start sending those out as well. I feel like then we'll have a nice clean package email to send to all. And then next, that's any other questions on the agenda item, or else I'll move on to this last real topic I wanted to go into was, Wells and I brought it up last time, was really trying to coordinate a multi-committee brainstorming session, a few months out from now. And we've been trying to get a handle on that. My dog is going crazy right now. So I don't know, Wells, if you want to jump in and say anything on that, because or else you guys are all going to have to listen to him trying to dig a hole in the couch.
Sure, I'll just say very briefly, because I know it's late. We were trying to think of, mapping out like a process over the next several months of like what we could do to engage with the other committees in a way that would be effective. And this is just a kind of a straw man process I'm going to talk through just for everyone's kind of critique and feedback. And we can talk about it in a future meeting. We don't have to decide this today, but the idea is that sometime between now and late spring, April, May timeframe, we are able to engage each committee through us. Kavitha has been meeting with the committees in person and having calls with them to kind of talk to them in person. But the idea is that we would have a kind of some type of questionnaire and a kind of companion district map that would go with it, that would ask a few very kind of pointed questions, which this committee would formulate. And then we would kind of gather this and collect this information across all the committees by this late spring timeframe, discuss it as a group, with the strategic planning team at that time, and then use the summer to kind of synthesize that information, looking for the kind of overlaps, synergies, conflicts, opportunities, and also thinking about what resources we have, and looking at that also in the context with, and very much in the context of the district needs, kind of putting that all together and thinking about what the top strategic planning priorities should be that we could take on a little bit longer term, like maybe no more than 3. One of those probably being MSBI. And then looking at, those 3 priorities in the fall and figuring out a way to kind of present them to the wider community, the wider board, and maybe forming kind of these little, kind of subgroups that take some ownership over these priorities and like work on moving the ball forward. MSBI, we've already got a little traction there. I'm sure there are a couple of other things that we might want to focus on in the next couple of years. That's basically it in a nutshell.
Thank you. Yes, exactly. And I think, yeah, we talked about doing it as just a, top level. These are the things I think each committee, trying to figure out, even though we already have kind of stated district needs and top priorities as a district, it's really like trying to find opportunities within that for how to have actionable, methodology behind it. So we'll probably need a few people from the committee to really take that handle on that or run with it once we determine those. But more to follow on that, and we'll try to engage whoever's interested in working on that process with us. Feel free to reach out to us. That's really it for that topic. And for chair's report, I'm going to keep it super brief and just say, I have
Sorry,
been.
Kavitha, I'm sorry, I had my hand raised. I don't know if you saw that.
No, go ahead.
Just that I wonder if we can't take this, like try this the other way around. When we started out the committee, we knew it was waterfront access, it was affordable housing, and I think there's a third one. And maybe take those ideas back to the committees, because the committee is 50 or sometimes 10 to 15 people, and I think having a strong position and asking them how they can contribute to it may be a more meaningful discussion. It's just an idea. Like we know what because of the 197A, we know what our committee or what our board wants. And it just might be an easier way to collect that kind of information. Just a thought as going from, the other way around.
Yeah, we weren't sure if we were kind of being redundant too, because we have already, I know for years, you've been determining the top needs. So I don't want to revisit it, but I did want to kind of, get a fresh set of thoughts going on around it. So yeah, we could.
But if we bring, if we bring to the committees how they can contribute, I think that's, like the health committee, maybe they just need to know how they can contribute to waterfront access. They probably don't know that. And if we can provide that information to them, that would be, they could then understand how that could contribute to our whole process. And obviously it's part of healthy living, so it makes absolute sense.
Yeah, I think we were talking about just trying to figure out those links between various committees. I know we already work together, but just trying to pull those things together and see where there's opportunities to kind of group. And it wouldn't have to be like the 15 members of each committee. It would be a 1 or 2 people from each of the key committees kind of, having little think tanks and all that stuff.
I just recommend going to them with recommendations. Okay. I recommend recommendations. Sorry, we're totally redundant, but yeah, having something they can respond to.
Okay, maybe you can help us kind of formulate, because we're just brainstorming it right now. So that would be great. I see a couple of things in the chat that are interesting from Casey. I don't know if you guys saw that. Graphic designers saying we could put flyers up and put them, and I think that's a good idea, pin them up in laundromats and pizza places and things like that. And Brian Lafferty mentioned a couple of ideas, or to use the free postings on Link NYC. That's what we were, yes, Brian, that's what we were kind of talking about. We weren't sure about how to, I think Cody was looking into that, but the Link NYC kiosks with a QR code and sending the survey to building management companies. That's a good idea too. We could just go straight to the management companies that have, like the major ones in our district, and they could send it out to all the buildings. We'll certainly pursue both of those. And that's it. I just wanted to let you guys know I have been having discussions about upcoming meetings and trying to see if there's anything we want to do collaboratively with various committees. I talked to LV about health, talked to Kevin and Jeannie with Parks, and I do have a meeting next week, hopefully with Rick and Reshma with the budget committee, and ongoing coordination, I think, with Corinne and Rich, on the housing. We were talking about something in May. open to other ideas for things that you think we need to flesh out and going into all of these top priorities for us. If there's other things, these last few sessions have been very helpful for me. Hopefully they have been for you guys too. And for the, the folks that are joining our meetings, but yeah, open to ideas around that. And really that's it. I don't have anything else in my chair's report. Does anybody have any old or new business? Wells?
Thanks, Kavitha. I just wanted to respond a little bit to Sandy's comment. So I really appreciate that, because being very new in this process and very new in this committee, I often don't, I don't have the benefit of knowing what's already been done. And so I think it's very helpful. I mean, it's a great idea to go out with, a really specific ask, right? So, I mean, if we can distill this process down to issues that have already been identified, whether it's waterfront access or affordable housing. I mean, I feel like the third one might be a little bit more kind of vision focused, what's the character, of this area, and what are the many different ways that how do each committee think about kind of the character of this district. But I think that's a good way, to put a lens on it that makes it specific, and then ask them to specifically plug into that. So I think that's a great suggestion, and I think we can figure out a way to make that work. I would love to talk to you more about it.
That sounds great, Wells. So we'll continue that conversation kind of offline, and anyone else who wants to jump in, maybe we could have a shared doc or something that we can bounce some ideas around on that. Anyone else? Old or new business? Wells, your hand's still up, but I think you're done, right? So, okay. And with that, I don't see anyone else. So I'll ask for a motion to adjourn. Corinne gives the motion. Oh.
Yeah. No. I don't think you need a second to adjourn, but I second anyway.
Okay, if there's no objections, we will adjourn the meeting at 8:38 p.m. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
everyone.
Hi,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Have a good evening.